Hey guys! Tonight we slip into something wildly inconvenient. A frilly cotton uniform with too many buttons, 3 layers of wool underneath, and a starched collar so tight it hums when you breathe. You're not heading to war, not tonight. No, tonight you're merely stepping into the shoes of someone much braver, Napoleon Bonaparte's personal servant. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, comment with your location and what time it is there. I love seeing where in the world you're dozing off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your night standing beside an absurdly large armoire, fiddling with the 6th of 12 identical white silk shirts. Each one must be folded, pressed, and then pressed again. Not because they're wrinkled, but because Napoleon likes the way double pressing makes them look richer. You're not sure what that means, but you nod anyway. You've stopped asking questions. You're surrounded by uniforms. So many uniforms. There's the dazzling green one with silver trim for parades, the heavy navy wool for inspecting troops, the ceremonial white with golden epaulets for state dinners. And don't forget the casual jacket he wears while writing angry letters to people he hasn't conquered yet. Each uniform has matching gloves, matching sashes, matching boots, and a unique odour that seems to cling no matter how many lavender sachets you sneak into the pockets. Your fellow servant Baptiste once whispered, "The Emperor has more outfits than battles." You both laughed, quietly, while ironing. See, Napoleon changed clothes a lot. It wasn't vanity, though let's be honest, the man did like a good silhouette, but strategy. He knew how people perceived him mattered, whether he was rallying troops or pacing in his study pretending to read Virgil while really listening to gossip in the hall. One uniform meant war, another meant peace, another meant, "I'm thinking about war again." And God help you if you handed him the wrong one. There was that incident in 1807, you remember it well, when someone laid out his Prussian campaign coat instead of the Viennese diplomatic one. He didn't yell. That would have been too kind. Instead, he stared at the coat for 10 full minutes, said nothing, and left the room. No one saw him for 3 hours. When he returned, the coat was gone, as was the servant who placed it. Historians still argue whether he was reassigned or just disappeared into the hedge maze. Oh, and the buttons. So many brass buttons. Each hand-polished, buffed to a mirror sheen at least 3 times a week, and always in the exact same order, left cuff to right cuff, top to bottom, circle to triangle to eagle motif. You tried once to start from the bottom and Napoleon noticed, of course he did. He also had a thing about collars, not too wide, not too narrow, just enough to frame the jawline, but not too much jawline. He reportedly told his tailor, "I want to look like I'm thinking about revolution, not choking on it." Quirky tidbit time. He once commissioned a uniform that was entirely navy velvet embroidered with tiny bees. It was for an optimism ceremony. No one knew what that meant. The bees took 8 seamstresses 2 weeks to complete. He wore it for 4 minutes. And when he was done with a uniform, he didn't hang it, didn't fold it. He dropped it, usually on the floor, sometimes on your head, and wandered off to conquer something. Probably a pastry. You were expected to catch, clean, reassemble, and rebutton everything before the next wardrobe shift, which could be 5 minutes or 5 hours from now. There was no schedule. There was only Napoleon time. One of your least favourite jobs, stuffing his stiff collars with precisely cut linen backing to help them stand up straight, but not too straight. Once a collar was overstuffed by 2 millimeters. He said it made him look like an arrogant goose. That phrase haunted the palace halls for weeks. Some evenings he demanded all of his uniforms be laid out at once, a long hallway of outfits, boots lined up like toy soldiers, gloves clipped and dangling like little flags of surrender. He would walk slowly, touching the fabrics, sometimes speaking to them, sometimes saluting. You learned not to react. It wasn't just the number of uniforms, it was their weight. Some of them, fully dressed, weighed as much as a small sheep. The stitching alone could strangle a lesser man. His cold weather inspection coat once gave a porter a hernia just from lifting it off the hook. By midnight, your hands are raw from folding, your knees sore from crouching, and you're still not done. There's a tiny red thread out of place on the lapel of his Hungarian campaign jacket. You pluck it like a violin string and whisper an apology. Outside the wardrobe room, you can hear him muttering. It's almost time. You quickly recheck the ceremonial boots, buffed, shined, laced just right, and place the left one 1 inch ahead of the right. Just how he likes it. You step back, breathe, sweat a little, and prepare for tomorrow, when you'll have to do it all over again. Only this time, there's a rumor he wants to try something more Egyptian. You don't ask. You just pray it doesn't involve sand. You're not sure what time it is now. Early, late, Napoleon time, which really means whenever he wakes up and decides you've slept enough. This morning, or is it night, you're hunched beside his boots. 6 pairs lined up in funereal formation. They look identical at first, but no, you've learned the subtle betrayals of boot design. Some are for horseback, some for walking, some for symbolic pacing, which is real, apparently. The pair he wants today, the soft black leather ones with just a bit of heel, enough to make him feel tall, but not so tall that anyone notices he's trying to feel tall. They're in terrible shape. You groan softly as you lift them, one still wet from yesterday's impromptu battlefield inspection, which took place in a perfectly dry hallway after he received some bad news about Austria. When he gets agitated, he paces. When he paces, he needs boots, and when he needs boots, you suffer. You reach for the saddle soap. Again. Rubbing leather in small, circular motions should be calming, meditative, but not when you're rushing to meet an emperor's mood swings. You've scrubbed boots more intimately than some people pet their dogs. And of course, it's not just the boots. There are the boot trees, wooden inserts to keep the shape. Then the silk boot liners, embroidered no less. And then Napoleon's latest obsession, invisible polish. He read somewhere, or imagined, that a true gentleman's boots should shine even in darkness. If I can't see them, he told you last week, I must sense them. Sure, that makes total sense. And heaven help you if there's a scuff. One time, during the Russian campaign, a small smudge led him to claim the cold had entered through his heels. Historians still argue whether he meant frostbite or metaphor. You rub faster. The scent of beeswax and horse oil fills the room. Behind you, someone sneezes. Loudly, you freeze, because you know what's next. A groggy, unmistakable voice growls from the adjacent chamber. Who's dying? It's always the same. Napoleon, never a morning person, liked to wake up in a fog of paranoia and insult. The sneeze was your fellow boot boy, Etienne. He whispers a regret. You whisper a prayer. Time to deliver the boots. You balance them on a velvet pillow like sacred relics. One slightly ahead of the other, angled to suggest strength but not aggression. You once tried symmetrical. He said it made him look like a merchant. In the emperor's chamber, he's slouched on a chaise, bare feet exposed, wrapped in an embroidered banyan that looks vaguely stolen from a Chinese opera. His hair is doing something unholy. Those, he says, pointing. Then, no, those. You don't flinch. It's a test. He always picks the opposite of what you present, just to feel in control. You pre-select it accordingly, like a chess game with mud. You lay the boots before him, careful not to make eye contact. Eye contact before coffee is a dangerous thing. He slides his feet in. One boot squeaks. You die inside. A moment passes, then another. Finally, he says, tighter next time. I want to feel them think. You nod. You have no idea what that means. Back in the servants' corridor, Etienne offers you a chunk of bread in solidarity. You chew in silence, your hands still smelling of leather and wax. One of the cooks passes by and mutters, "He's wearing the campaign boots indoors again." You nod. Of course he is. The irony? For all the fuss over boots, Napoleon hated walking. He'd ride a horse across a field just to avoid 10 steps across gravel. But he loved the idea of walking, of marching, of striding into destiny, which meant the boots had to look perfect. even if they barely touched the ground. Once, during a long march across Italy, his boots gave him a blister, a minor thing, barely visible, but he made such a show of it, limping dramatically, that several generals thought he'd been wounded in action. A statue was nearly commissioned. And yet, when that blister healed, he blamed the servant who laced the boots too tightly for morale. That was you. You received a formal warning and a lecture about heel-based leadership. The next day, you were told to redesign the insole layout. You had no idea what that meant, but you drew some diagrams, mostly circles. He nodded approvingly and called it tactical geometry. Quirky tidbit. He once requested a pair of boots lined with lamb's wool, cedar chips, and the pages of a specific Roman historian. Just the pages that mentioned betrayal. He claimed they absorbed treason through the toes. No one questioned him. Now it's mid-morning. The boots are on. He's stomping toward the stables to inspect a horse he already hates. You trail behind. A small polishing cloth hidden in your sleeve in case of dust emergencies. Your back aches. Your fingers are stained. Your brain is somewhere between fury and admiration, because for all the absurdity, you're polishing history. Boot by boot. You don't get to sleep in the palace. That's reserved for people who don't sweat through their clothes while folding epaulets. No, your bed is a narrow cot in a shared, stone-walled room beneath the scullery, close enough to the emperor's chamber to hear his footsteps, but far enough that if he yells, someone else might answer first. Which brings us to mornings. Napoleon's mornings. Or more accurately, his wake-ups, because the concept of morning shifts depending on his mood, breakfast, and political dreams. You learn to dread the silence. If he wakes up quietly, that's when you panic, because that usually means he's scheming, or worse, waiting to catch you off guard. But if he starts shouting, that's your cue to spring into action with towels, eau de cologne, and the ceremonial wake-up coat. Yes, he had a specific coat for waking up. Brocade trim, velvet cuffs, slightly absurd. This morning, it starts with a grunt. Then the sound of feet hitting the carpet. Then, "Where's the sun? Did we misplace the sun again?" You've heard this one before. It means the curtains aren't pulled exactly wide enough to let in the morning rays. Not too much light, just enough to bathe the room in what he called the light of destiny. You scramble in with the cord. Etienne helps you. The curtains glide open. "Better," Napoleon mutters, half wrapped in bed linens. "Now coffee and consequence." That means bring his morning coffee and the letters from whoever disappointed him overnight. You shuffle in with the tray. Silver, steaming. 2 sugars, never stirred. A dash of brandy if it's Thursday, but it's not Thursday, or is it? You hand him the coffee and brace yourself. He takes 1 sip, then scowls. "It tastes like retreat." He says this often. It means he wanted more brandy. While he sips, your job is to pretend not to be present. You hover near the window, aligning the hem of his dressing gown with the breeze. He likes it to flutter, but only slightly. Too much wind, and it's revolutionary. Too little, and it's bourgeois. Some days he wants to be dressed immediately. Other days he lounges for hours, muttering war poetry and pretending not to nap. But always he has complaints about the wake-up process. Too loud, too quiet, too bright, too dim. The coffee's too hot. No, wait, it's too cold. The towels are aggressively folded. The floor creaks in ways that make him feel haunted by destiny. Historians still argue whether these tantrums were calculated power plays or just symptoms of gout. You once tried to pre-warm his slippers before he got out of bed. He stepped into them, paused, then glared at you. "I asked for slippers," he said. "No, not a foot sauna." You apologized, removed the slippers, and fanned them for 10 minutes until they cooled to a more continental temperature. Then there was the time someone adjusted the bed angle by 3 degrees. He claimed it gave him political vertigo. The servant was reassigned to archiving, some say forever. The emperor's bed itself was a marvel of overthought engineering. Feather-stuffed, silk-lined, and surrounded by a rail of precisely measured pillows that were never to be moved. The mattress was firm on one side, soft on the other, supposedly for strategy. He liked to sleep diagonally, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets like an anxious caterpillar plotting imperial domination. But what irked his servants the most? The surprise wake-ups. Just when you thought he'd gone down for the night, he'd bolt upright, declare a dream of battle, and demand someone fetch a map, a quill, and the quiet valet, not the sweaty one. That was you. You've had entire conversations with him while he was half asleep and fully unreasonable. Once he dictated an entire treaty between two imaginary countries, Chandeliera and Carpetistan. You wrote it down, he signed it, then told you to burn it. You didn't. You kept it. It's hidden behind a loose brick in the laundry room. Sometimes, in the hazy hours between night and morning, you'd hear him talking in his sleep. Murmurs about cannons, fields, betrayals. Once you swore he muttered, "Tell Josephine the socks were silk." Quirky tidbit, he once insisted on waking to the smell of oranges for a month. The staff had to peel and position oranges near his pillow every night. Eventually he declared, "Too Mediterranean," and switched to baked pears. By mid-morning, the full ritual is done. He's bathed, dressed, coiffed, caffeinated, and has found a reason to be mildly annoyed. You've survived another wake-up. For now. Tomorrow it could be different. He might demand rose petals in the foot basin, or a live harpist, or silence so pure you can hear history. Thinking, you trudge out of the room, a folded towel over your arm, and the ghost of his grumble in your ears. You've earned a 2-minute break in the servants' corridor. Maybe even a sip of leftover coffee, but don't relax too much. The soup must be hot. You're in the kitchen now, and it's not even noon, but your shirt is already sticking to your back. And the soup, oh the soup, is bubbling on the massive iron range, like it knows it's about to be judged by the fussiest tongue in Europe. Napoleon's midday meal is less of a dining experience and more of a battle between temperature and timing, because the soup must be hot. Not just warm, not just steaming. It must be hot enough to fog up the emperor's spectacles the moment the bowl hits the table, but never, never hot enough to burn his tongue. This is the central contradiction of your culinary existence. The chef, a wide-eyed man named Renaud with suspiciously trembling hands, mutters to himself in a rhythm that suggests madness or very advanced seasoning. He's already remade the consommé twice. The first was too democratic. The second was too Spanish. Now it's a turnip broth with veal reduction, garnished with a tiny sprig of marjoram that was picked, according to palace myth, by a monk who once stared at Napoleon for too long. You're the runner, the one who carries the bowl down the winding corridor, up the back stairs, through the vestibule, around the statue of Jupiter, which Napoleon insists he doesn't like, but never lets anyone remove, and into the chamber. But here's the challenge: the soup must not lose heat, not even a degree. So you wrap the bowl in linen, cradle it like an infant, and walk briskly, but not too briskly. Running jiggles the broth, jiggles create bubbles, bubbles are visible, and nothing ruins the imperial experience faster than foam. One time, Etienne slipped on a loose floor tile and arrived with soup that sloshed over the rim. Napoleon stared at the stain and muttered, "This is how empires fall." Etienne was reassigned to carrot peeling. Forever. You enter the dining room. He's already seated, alone, with one elbow on the table and the other hand rifling through letters about grain shortages and Hungarian horses. He doesn't look up. You place the soup before him with the practiced reverence of someone delivering a sacred scroll. Then you step back. Exactly 3 steps, not 2, not 4, 3. He lifts the spoon. You stop breathing. Steam curls upward. He sips, slowly. His lips purse. He blinks. Then at last, acceptable. You exhale. Renaud will survive another day. He continues sipping, spoon scraping softly. You note that the marjoram has floated to the side, too casual. Tomorrow it must be anchored with a sliver of onion for visual symmetry. Now you watch as he shifts gears mid-meal. "Bring the sauce," he says, still eating. No context, no explanation. just the sauce. You run. Back to the kitchen. The sauce, you shout. Renaud panics. Which sauce? I don't know, just sauce. 5 minutes later, you return with a ramekin of Dijon mustard mixed with cream and disappointment. Napoleon dips a piece of bread, chews once, then says, "This tastes like retreat." You're not sure if that's good or bad anymore. He eats in short, intense bursts, often with long pauses in between where he stares into the middle distance like he's either composing military doctrine or trying to remember where he left his napkin. Historians still argue whether his eating habits were influenced by his campaigns or if he always just chewed like a man with 30 seconds before the next cavalry charge. Sometimes he talks during meals, not to you, never to you, but at the room. He'll lecture the chair about Russian supply chains or scold the table for not aligning with his world view. Once, he argued, with a bowl of cherries, you were there. The cherries won. You clean up swiftly, knowing full well the next course might be cancelled on a whim. Napoleon often declared mid-bite, "I'm full of ideas, not food," and would push the plate away like a man above mortal hunger. But if the soup wasn't there to begin with, you'd never hear the end of it. One of the footmen once asked why soup mattered so much. You told him the truth. Because the emperor believed that a hot soup meant order, and cold soup meant France was crumbling. Quirky tidbit? During the height of the Peninsular War, he reportedly carried a collapsible silver soup spoon in his boot. Not a weapon, not a keepsake, a soup spoon. "To remind me of civilization," he allegedly said. Now the bowl is empty. He's chewing the last bit of crust. You collect the dish silently, holding it level like a waiter in an earthquake. As you exit the chamber, he calls out, "Tomorrow, maybe chestnut," which sounds simple, but you know it means someone, probably you, has to find chestnuts in June. Back in the kitchen, Renaud is collapsed in a chair, clutching his ladle like a crucifix. You nod, he nods. There are no words, just broth, sweat, and quiet relief. Until tomorrow, because the soup must be hot. You think you've seen it all, imperial tantrums, mystery sauces, a man arguing with cherries, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the sheer emotional intensity surrounding Napoleon's handkerchiefs. Yes, handkerchiefs. You wouldn't expect squares of embroidered linen to carry such political weight, but here, in the palace's underbelly, entire hierarchies have formed over whose job it is to starch, fold, and deliver the emperor's daily supply of fabric sniffers. 12 a day, minimum. Clean, white, pressed, always white, always fresh. One in each coat pocket, one in his dressing gown, one under his pillow, one beside the maps, 2 by the bathtub, and a few that just seemed to rotate locations like spies on assignment. Napoleon had a nose, a dramatic nose, the kind that announced itself 3 seconds before the rest of him entered the room. He was proud of it. He flared it theatrically when making a point. He rubbed it compulsively when thinking. He wiped it with such frequency you wondered if it was some sort of strategy. "Perhaps he's measuring air pressure," Etienne once said. You didn't laugh. You were busy ironing the corners of handkerchief number 11. Each one had to be folded just so, corner to centre, then tri-folded into a neat, crisp rectangle, no thicker than a sardine and no looser than a treaty with Austria. One time, a fold was slightly off. Not ripped, not stained, not even wrinkled. Just off by a few millimetres. He unfolded it, refolded it, while humming something vaguely menacing and handed it back with a frown. "Try again," he said, as if your entire job was folding symbolic surrender. Another time, the embroidery was missing his preferred initial. Just N, nothing frilly. Someone had tried to impress him with a gold-threaded NB. "Who do they think I am?" he barked. "The Pope?" He used the offending cloth to mop up a minor wine spill. A message, surely. Historians still argue whether his obsession with handkerchiefs was rooted in childhood trauma or simply a side effect of inhaling too much battlefield smoke. You suspect it's something deeper. Control. The world around him was messy. People disobeyed, weather betrayed, wars dragged, but a folded handkerchief, that he could trust if it was done right. Quirky tidbit: Napoleon had an official handkerchief inventory updated weekly, a logbook, inked, labelled by day and occasion. There was even a secret drawer for emergency handkerchiefs, which he once dramatically opened after sneezing during a Spanish treaty negotiation. He blew his nose with flair, paused, then declared the deal closed. Even his sneezes were strategic. You once saw a valet try to sneak in a handkerchief that had been used once, by the emperor, but hadn't touched his actual nose, just his hand. It was still warm, in a weird way. The moment the linen hit his palm, Napoleon froze, sniffed, then said quietly, "This one remembers too much." The valet was reassigned to counting spoons, which, by the way, is not as easy as it sounds. But back to the handkerchiefs. You've folded them in candlelight, under duress, during bombardments, and once while half asleep. You've hidden spare ones inside coat linings, behind curtain tassels, even inside a hollowed-out encyclopedia volume labelled Geography of Corsica. There was a period in 1809 when Napoleon developed a sudden distaste for starch, claimed it made the linen too judgmental. You had to rewash and refold all 12 without starch, then arrange them in ascending softness. He sniffed each one like a perfumer evaluating roses. "This one," he finally said, "feels optimistic." You remember it well. You gave it a slight lavender rinse. It became known as the optimistic handkerchief. He carried it into Austria. When he returned, it was missing. A mourning period ensued. You're not saying it caused his next defeat, but the timing was suspicious. Some nights, in your quieter moments, you wonder what happened to it. Maybe it drifted off in a soldier's coat. Maybe it lies folded beneath a museum case somewhere, still faintly lavender. Or maybe, just maybe, it's in Josephine's drawer, a forgotten scrap of softness in a world of heavy velvet and hard marble. Back in the laundry room, you check today's supply, 11 done, 1 to go. The corner stitching is slightly loose, so you patch it with invisible thread. You fold, slowly, carefully, aligning corners with corners, symmetry, serenity, submission. You place it on the silver tray and carry it up the stairs. In the hallway, Napoleon passes by, in his ceremonial jacket, sniffling lightly. He doesn't stop. Just extends a hand, mid-step. You place the handkerchief in his palm. He presses it to his nose, then nods. That's the highest praise you'll get today. Maybe all week, but it's enough. You'd think the olfactory chaos of Napoleon's world ended with handkerchiefs, but you'd be wrong. Because if there was one thing the emperor loved nearly as much as maps and metaphors, it was smell, particularly the kind that made his chambermaids weep quietly into their aprons. It wasn't that he wanted to smell good in any conventional sense. No, that would be too easy. He wanted to smell intentional, like conquest, like culture, like someone who had personally invaded Cologne and extracted its essence with a saber. Every morning after his barely tolerated bath, we'll get to that later, came the cologne selection. And it wasn't just a splash and go, it was an entire ceremony. Bottles laid out in size order, labels perfectly aligned, crystal stoppers gleaming under a skylight that filtered in exactly the right amount of moral superiority. The choices varied. On days of diplomacy, a citrus lavender blend. For battle plans, musk and leather. And if he was feeling particularly reflective, myrrh and something called essence of the Nile, which you suspect was just watered-down incense mixed with sandalwood. You, of course, are the poor soul who applies it. You hold the linen pad with gloved fingers. He doesn't like the oils of human skin touching anything that touches his neck. And dab carefully behind each ear. Not too much, not too little. Just enough that when he turns his head, dramatically at a council meeting, the scent lingers like a diplomatic threat. Too much, and he chokes. Too little, and he accuses you of sabotaging his charisma. You once tried a subtle blend of bergamot and clove. He sniffed once, coughed twice, and declared, "This smells like Russian hesitation." No one understood, but you were reassigned to firewood detail for 3 days. And here's the problem. Napoleon sweat. A lot. All that wool, all that shouting, all those boots, it added up. His private chambers constantly smelled like ambition, and warm wool socks, which is why his staff kept small pots of Egyptian incense burning in corners. Not too strong, or he'd complain it clouded the judgment. Just strong enough to fight the smell of a man determined to rewrite Europe before lunch. There was once a fad among the staff to guess his mood based on scent. If he reached for the cedar bottle, expect pacing. If it was verbena, he was likely to write letters. If he mixed multiple bottles, well, someone was probably about to be fired. One poor maid once fainted after entering his chamber during a frankincense phase. She woke up, convinced she'd seen angels. You still tease her about it. Historians still argue whether Napoleon used scent as psychological warfare or just didn't know when to stop. Some claim he believed certain smells enhanced mental clarity. Others say he liked watching people try to mask their reactions. Your nose, meanwhile, hasn't worked properly in months, and cologne wasn't limited to the body. He demanded it in his bath water, spritzed on gloves, brushed onto upholstery. Once, during a diplomatic reception, he had the curtains lightly scented with rosemary so the entire room would smell like a decisive spring. No one was quite sure what that meant, but the ambassador from Sweden sneezed violently and had to be escorted out. Quirky tidbit. Napoleon reportedly asked his perfumer to create a scent that evoked the feeling of being undefeated. The poor man tried for 3 months. You remember him well, small, twitchy, always surrounded by dried flowers and existential despair. In the end, he presented something heavy with cedar and pride. Napoleon called it a bit too Corsican, then used it to freshen the dog's blanket. The dog smelled fantastic. Somewhere along the line, the staff developed coping mechanisms. Lemon peels tucked behind ears, drops of peppermint oil dabbed under noses, a personal favourite, holding your breath for 30 seconds every time he raised his arms, which brings us to the incense. Those little charcoal discs you had to light just so, no smoke, just gentle curl. The blend was always changing, sometimes sandalwood and amber, sometimes cinnamon bark and something suspiciously sulphurous. Once you walked into his dressing room and thought the palace was on fire. It wasn't, he was just experimenting with the fragrance of war. You coughed, he smiled. Strong, isn't it? You nodded, blinking tears. Today it's a citrus-heavy day, lemon oil, vetiver, maybe a dash of rosemary. You apply it with precision. He watches in the mirror, tilting his head like a satisfied falcon. Then suddenly, "You smell like furniture," he says. It's not clear if it's an insult or just an observation. Either way, you bow and back out of the room. Back in the laundry, Etienne holds out D's out a clean handkerchief, unscented. He knows, you know, the only relief from this fragrant battlefield is a brief inhale of plain linen and the hope that tomorrow, maybe, he'll skip the incense and just go with soap. But you know he won't, because this is Napoleon, the man who wanted to leave not just footprints in history, but a scent trail so strong Europe would sneeze for centuries. You never thought you'd grow tired of the smell of citrus and cedar, but here you are, nose half numb, preparing the bath, the most delicate and nerve-wracking ritual of all. Napoleon's baths weren't indulgent. They were necessary, sacred, strategic, sometimes emotional, often dramatic, and always, always your problem. He didn't like them too hot or too cold. The water had to be just right, which in Bonaparte speak meant exactly lukewarm with a lean toward womb-like, as one traumatized footman once described it. If it was even a few degrees off, he'd grow suspicious, not angry, worse, philosophical. "I can't lead men if I'm bathing like a farmer," he once murmured, lowering himself into a tub and frowning at the steam. No one knew what that meant. You smiled politely and dropped in another warmed towel. The bath itself was tiny, not a grand marble thing like in the illustrations. It was shallow, tin-lined, and vaguely coffin-shaped, as if bathing was something to be endured rather than enjoyed. And it sat awkwardly in the corner of his chamber, surrounded by a screen for modesty, even though he routinely yelled orders while soaking. your job. You filled it by hand, bucket after bucket, hauled from a kitchen hearth 2 floors below, sometimes with help, sometimes without. The entire process took over an hour, and still he'd dip a toe in and say, "It's not inspiring." One time in winter you accidentally warmed it too much. Steam filled the chamber, the windows fogged. Napoleon stood over the tub, sniffed once and muttered, "Feels Austrian." He refused to get in. He went to bed unbathed and angry. You lost your glove privileges for a week. The water was never plain. Lavender oil was standard. Sometimes bay leaf. Occasionally rose, but only if the roses came from Josephine's garden. If they didn't, he claimed they smelled of betrayal. And then came the washing. Napoleon didn't like to be touched unless he wanted to be touched, which meant you had to hover with sponge and cloth, waiting for the precise moment he'd flick a finger or say, "Now," like a monarch commanding lightning. You dabbed, never scrubbed, especially the ears. He was very protective of his ears. He'd sit, stiff-backed, staring at nothing in particular, and occasionally narrate military maneuvers or argue aloud with past enemies while you gently washed the backs of his knees. One day he said, "If Marengo had bathed more, he'd still be alive." Marengo was a horse. You nodded solemnly and kept sponging. Soap was also a battlefield. He had dozens of options, milled in Marseille, imported from Egypt, infused with sandalwood or orange peel, but he usually just sniffed them and picked one based on instinct, like choosing a battle formation. There was one he especially liked, an ugly brown block that smelled vaguely like cloves and anxiety. He called it the Corsican one. When supplies ran low, he wrote an angry letter, not to the supplier, to soap itself. You saw the draft. It began, "You have disappointed me." Historians still argue whether he ever mailed it. Now you're kneeling by the tub, checking the temperature for the 12th time with your elbow. He swears hands lie. You stir in the lavender, you fluff the towels, you align the soap dish like it's under military review. He enters in silence, wearing his bathing robe, which is embroidered with bees and slightly scorched at the hem, from that candle incident you're not allowed to talk about. He pauses at the tub, dips a toe, nods, you exhale. He lowers himself in with a sigh that sounds like a man letting go of the French Republic and embracing warm water. He closes his eyes. You begin the slow ritual, towel on shoulder, sponge in hand, bucket at the ready. He mumbles something. You lean closer. "Remind me to invade Naples more gently next time." You nod. "Of course." Naples, gently. Got it. 10 minutes in, he splashes once, an imperial swirl, and says, "Handkerchief." You pass him one. He dries only his nose, then hands it back. You have no idea what to do with it, so you fold it respectfully and put it beside the soap. He lounges, one knee up, as if posing for a melancholic statue. Occasionally he flicks water with his fingers. Once he says, "This is how Caesar thought." No one questions the logic. Quirky tidbit. During the Prussian campaign, he refused to bathe for 3 days because the camp water lacked moral clarity. But on the 4th day, he demanded a copper tub, rose oil, and silence. You had to stand guard and wave away mosquitoes with a fan made from battle maps. And now, as the bath winds down, he demands the pouring jug, a final rinse tradition. You pour carefully, starting at the shoulders, letting water cascade down his back. He sighs, eyes closed. You've seen this before. It means the bath has passed muster. You dry him swiftly but gently, wrapping him in towels like a giant dumpling of destiny. He steps out, says nothing, and walks away trailing lavender and authority. You drain the tub, wipe the tiles, and mop up the strategic splash zones. Later, as you scrub the towels and reheat the bath water for tomorrow's forecasted rinse, you whisper to no one in particular, "At least he didn't sneeze in the tub today." Progress. It's nightfall now, though with palace life that means very little. Candles burn like nervous soldiers in every corridor, and you're elbow deep in what can only be described as a feather crisis. Tonight, Napoleon wants his bed firmer than usual, but not hard. This, of course, means you're currently punching a pillow. You're in the imperial bedchamber, dimly lit by wall sconces and a single trembling oil lamp. The bed looms in the center like a naval flagship, wide, curtained, layered in cream and crimson fabric, and stacked with a terrifying variety of pillows: goose, duck, eiderdown, square, oblong, bolstered, and mysterious. Some are for his head, others are thinking pillows. A few he just liked to throw at aides when things weren't going well in Spain. You fluff one with great care, plumping the corners evenly, checking the give with your palm. You've learned the emperor doesn't sleep on pillows so much as consult them. He claims one makes him dream better, another helps him wake with vision. One particular bolster, stuffed as rumor goes with exotic feathers from Egypt, is used only on nights before major decisions, like whether to invade Russia. Bad pillow day, in hindsight. Tonight's fuss began with the phrase, "It feels like I'm sleeping on surrender." That's how you knew it was going to be a long evening. So you brought the emergency feather stash, tiny linen bags, each labelled in cursive with their source bird. He's partial to goose, but occasionally dabbles in duck, if feeling whimsical. And the swan one, too lofty, makes me feel like a poem, he once growled. You're rearranging the mattress layers when Etienne appears, carrying a measuring stick. Not for the bed, for the drape height. Yes, the bed curtains must hang at the precise length, not touching the floor, not floating too high. 1 inch off, and the emperor claims it disrupts airflow and balance. There was once a rumor that someone lost their position because a bed curtain hem tickled Napoleon's ankle in the night. No one confirmed it, but you hemmed everything half an inch higher after that. Quirky tidbit, he occasionally requested rose petals under the sheets, not for romance, just because it reminded him of Corsican spring, but only yellow rose petals. Red was too republican. White was funeral. Pink was indecisive. So tonight you scatter precisely dried yellow petals between the 3rd and 4th sheet layer and whisper a small apology to the laundress. The mattress itself is stuffed with a curious blend of horsehair, wool, and something you suspect is hay. He claims it feels like winning. As you finish adjusting the foot pillow, which must be at a friendly angle to the main pillow, whatever that means, you light the corner incense, just a touch of chamomile and myrtle, no more cedar. He says it makes his dreams too aggressive. You step back, admiring your work like a battlefield map. Everything aligned, no rogue feathers, drapes at attention, the hair faintly herbal. Then the door opens. Napoleon enters in his sleep robe, navy silk with gold embroidery shaped like bees. His slippers whisper on the tile. He stops, scans the bed like a general evaluating trenches. "Did you fix the 3rd layer?" "Yes, sire. Too much feather yesterday." "I remember." He walks to the bed, places a hand flat on the mattress, waits, then shifts it in a slow circle like a farmer checking soil. That's a good sign. He climbs in. Slowly, carefully, lays back. The room holds its breath. Then it feels sturdy, like a man should dream here. You resist the urge to cheer. Etienne exhales. You step away from the bed, kneel, and adjust the blanket edge exactly 1 inch over his shoulder. "Not too much," he murmurs. "Don't smother glory." You nod. He shifts once, then again, then pulls the pillow behind his head just slightly. "You worry." He sighs. "Better." Historians still argue whether Napoleon ever truly slept well. Some say he rarely got more than 4 hours a night. Others claim he napped constantly, everywhere, from coaches to council rooms to uncomfortable camp beds. But one thing's certain, when he did sleep, it had to be his way. He closes his eyes now. You dim the sconces until the room glows like a story someone's trying to forget. You and Etienne exit silently, stepping around creaky floorboards, avoiding the loose one by the tapestry of Julius Caesar. Napoleon insists that one be left unfixed, a reminder that nothing is perfect. Back in the corridor, you finally exhale. Another bed prepared, another evening survived. You'll be back in 6 hours, or maybe 3, depending on the dreams. He once woke at 2:47 a.m. and demanded to know why his feet felt betrayed. Turned out the foot pillow had shifted by ½ an inch. Never again. You wake before dawn, not because you have to, but because the memory of that one time a map had a wrinkle still haunts your dreams. A wrinkle on a military campaign map. It nearly caused a diplomatic incident between France and a very confused aide-de-camp. Today, you're summoned early. The Emperor is already pacing. You can hear his boots clicking with intent and caffeine across the tiled floor. That can only mean one thing: map time. Napoleon adored his maps. They weren't just paper, they were prophecy, visions, possibility laid flat and folded. Every morning maps were unrolled like scripture, and if they creased or curled, catastrophe. Your job? Smoother-in-chief, keeper of corners, master of the warm coin technique. See, he believed cold hands caused wrinkles, so you kept a pouch of coins, slightly warmed by the hearth, and used them like paperweights, gently pressing out every fold, every mischievous ripple that dared disturb the empire's future. There's an entire chamber devoted to cartography, not a grand library or well-lit hall. No, just a small, windowless room lined with scrolls, inkpots, and several exhausted-looking tables. It smells like dust, parchment, and unspoken anxiety. The maps themselves range in size and mood, some small and tidy, for minor irritations, as he says, others large enough to cover banquet tables, stitched together like tapestries. He liked to walk across them barefoot. Yes, barefoot. There is no surer way to know a country than to feel its valleys with your feet, he once said, stepping delicately on a topographic sketch of Bavaria. You spent hours afterward cleaning ink from between his toes. This morning, the map is Italy. Again, he has thoughts. Venice always looks like it's mocking me, he mutters, circling it with a quill. You stand nearby, holding a soft cloth and your warmest coin. He gestures to a wrinkle near Parma. You glide in like a ghost, press once, and step back, smooth as diplomacy. Better, he says, but then disaster. A small curl at the corner of the Tyrrhenian Sea, tiny, harmless to everyone but Napoleon. He kneels beside it, examines, squints, frowns. This is why the British never respect us. You're not sure how that connects, but you nod gravely. Etienne whispers a nervous blessing. Historians still argue whether Napoleon used maps to plan battles or just to argue with gravity. Either way, every crease was personal, every unfixed corner a challenge to his authority. Once a storm caused a leak in the roof above the map room. A drop of water landed on the centre of Poland. Napoleon saw it, paused, then declared, "It has begun." No one asked what had begun. The drop was dried with a linen square. That linen was never seen again. You recall the infamous folding incident of 1808. A junior aide attempted to fold a map the wrong way, against the crease. Napoleon watched, horrified, then reportedly muttered, "This is what betrayal looks like." The aide was reassigned to horse grooming in Siberia, so now each map is unrolled with reverence. You've perfected the two-person flutter-unfurl, the hover-hold, and the sacred palm press. You even use a goat-hair brush to remove imaginary dust. And he paces. He circles towns with blotchy ink. He stabs rivers with compass tips. He once kissed a peninsula. You didn't ask which one. There was also his travelling map kit, a leather roll with collapsible legs and weighted corners. You had to carry it with you everywhere, even to dinner. He'd often unfurl a map between courses. Past the salt, also where's Dresden? Quirky tidbit. Napoleon once requested a map painted on silk so he could fold it into a neck scarf. When questioned why, he said, "So I may wear destiny." The scarf was beautiful, completely impractical. It bled ink in the rain. Now, back in the present, you're gently rotating the Calabrian region under his fingertips while he mutters about troop movement and the arrogance of mountains. You nod, smoothing the coast of Sicily, careful not to catch your sleeve on the ink pot. Finally, he steps back, arms folded, contemplating. "The map is ready," he says. "Now I will be, too." You quickly fold it, correctly of course, and place it into its velvet-lined case. But just as you're turning to leave, he stops you. "One more thing," he says, voice soft. "Yes, sire?" "Tomorrow I want the world." You blink, unsure if this is a metaphor or another oversized document request. He smiles slightly. "The globe. Bring the large one." Ah, the globe, the giant globe, the one that takes 3 men to carry and has Australia still labelled terra incognita. You nod. "Of course." You exit the map chamber with quiet triumph. No creases today, no tears. Only slightly sweaty palms. Back in the hallway, Etienne claps you on the back. "You're the best coin press man we've got." You smile. "Maybe, but tomorrow. Tomorrow is Globe Day, and that, frankly, is terrifying. The sun isn't even up yet, but your day has already taken a dangerous turn, because today is Globe Day." You wish that were a metaphor. It's not. The globe in question is roughly the size of a wine barrel made of lacquered mahogany, bronze meridians, and sheer aristocratic menace. It doesn't roll, it looms. And it lives in a room most servants call the Gallery of Impossible Geography. Why? Because Napoleon doesn't use the globe like a normal person. No gentle spinning, no idle pointing, no, where is Madagascar? Instead, he stares at it like it owes him money. Then he taps countries with increasing intensity until he's worked himself into a frenzy over a port dispute that happened 300 years ago. Your job today is to polish and transport the globe, with gloves, with reverence, with core strength. You and Etienne haul it, slowly, carefully, down the gallery hallway. It takes both of you to maneuver around the bust of Cicero, which Napoleon calls the guy who never shut up, and the narrow arch that always smells faintly of cabbage. Napoleon is waiting, arms crossed, eyes sharp, in full uniform even though it's 5:42 a.m. "Put it there," he says, pointing to the middle of a carpet embroidered with bees, as if positioning the globe on symbolic insects will enhance military precision. You place it down, it creaks. He raises an eyebrow. "Too dry," he mutters. "That means apply lemon oil." So you do. You dab a cloth with scented oil and begin circling the Indian Ocean, buffing it to a faint sheen. Not too much. Napoleon dislikes shine. He says it distracts from the lines of conquest. Once a young footman over-polished the Caspian Sea. Napoleon stared at the reflection for a full minute, then said, "I can't defeat myself." The footman fainted. You learned the proper oil ratio that day. Now, globe positioned and gleaming, the performance begins. He circles it once, hands behind his back, silent. Then he stops, points. Sardinia is smug. You say nothing. There's no correct response to a continent being accused of attitude. He turns the globe again, slowly, dramatically, and taps on India. "Here," he says. "This. Why didn't I take this?" You open your mouth, then close it. You're not paid for answers. Just polish, he continues, muttering. Something about tea, elephants, British interference. Then, in a sudden pivot, he flicks the Arctic Circle and says, "Too cold for genius?" You nod. "Certainly, sire." Historians still argue whether Napoleon used the globe to plan real campaigns or simply as an emotional outlet. Some suggest he consulted it before bed like others read horoscopes. Others claim it was mostly an ego prop, a way to spin the planet and imagine himself in all places at once. You've seen him spend hours just tracing coastlines, whispering naval maneuvers to himself while dunking bread into thick black coffee. Once he stared at Australia for so long, you thought he might declare war on it. He didn't. But he did call it suspicious. Quirky tidbit? He once asked his globe maker to create a version where France was slightly larger. Just a touch. A hint of cartographic ego. The artisan refused. Napoleon stared at him and said, "So your loyalty lies with longitude." That artisan moved to Spain. Back in the gallery, the emperor has moved on to North Africa. He's balancing a small quill in one hand, gesturing toward Tunisia and talking about camels. "Why don't we use more camels?" he says, mostly to the globe. You're not sure if this is a logistical question or a philosophical one. You nod anyway. The globe wobbles slightly as he presses into it, drawing imaginary circles. You steady it without being asked, exactly how he likes. Silent correction, invisible assistance, the art of servantship at its peak. Then comes the alignment phase. This is where he spins the globe to match the position of actual sunrise. He believes it helps with geopolitical intuition. Once he made you realign it 3 times in one morning because Spain felt slightly off. You rotate it gently, lining it up so the real sun outside will, in theory, hit Corsica at dawn. He watches closely at stop. You freeze. Here? He studies it. Yes, good. Corsica should never be in shadow. You make a mental note to never, ever let Corsica face the wall again. He sits now on a stool beside the globe, one hand resting on the equator like he owns it, which to be fair, he kind of believes he does. "Bring the small flags," he says. Oh no, the small flags are tiny velvet pennants on silver pins, which he sticks into various locations to represent moods, not strategies, not battle sites, moods. Today's flags: blue for ambition, green for unrest, red for potential. He stabs them into various places with great ceremony: blue on Egypt, red on Sweden, green on Portugal, then a yellow one, an odd choice, right in the middle of the Black Sea. You don't ask. He leans back, studies the whole spinning mess of continents and cloth. Then he smiles. Rare, dangerous. It's almost perfect, he says. You wonder what that almost might entail. A new ocean? A tilted axis? You back away slowly, bow, and begin pushing the globe back into its alcove. It squeaks again. He doesn't seem to notice. As you disappear into the corridor, Etienne meets you with a cloth and a sigh. "Did he move Hungary again?" he asks. You nod. Of course. Because on Globe Day, reality is negotiable. There's something oddly calming about polishing silver at midnight. Maybe it's the quiet clink of utensils, or the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off 10 identical soup spoons. But more likely, it's the fact that none of these objects can yell at you. You're in the scullery now, elbow deep in a cutlery audit because tomorrow Napoleon might host a dinner. And that means every piece of silver needs to be counted, shined, aligned, and possibly replaced if it carries the wrong kind of aura. The Imperial Dining Service is no mere collection of forks and knives, it's a metal army. Over 400 pieces, each with their own function, each with their own history of offending the Emperor. That knife, once too blunt, that spoon, too reflective, that tiny dessert fork, used by the Prussian ambassador, who then insulted French bread, gone forever. You polish methodically, cloth in one hand, resignation in the other. Etienne reads aloud from the official dinnerware manifest like he's reciting scripture. 1 soup ladle, weight unbalanced, minor dent, assigned to side service. 2 fish forks, questionable finish, possible Polish origin, quarantine. 3 butter knives, no engraving, suspicious. This is normal, because Napoleon doesn't just eat, he performs, and the dinner table is his stage. Every element has a role. The centerpiece must suggest power, the salt cellars must evoke stability, and the napkin folds, symbolic geometry. You once folded a napkin into a fan. He looked at it and said, "I don't want to be cooled. I want to be feared." You switched to triangles, still too playful. You settled on the Corsican summit fold, pointed, sharp, vaguely aggressive. He approved. There was a time when he insisted on having his initials engraved into every piece of silver. "So the food understands where it's going," he said. No one understood, but the engraver was summoned anyway. And when the engraving was slightly off-center on a serving fork, oh, he noticed. He didn't say anything, just used it to eat exactly 3 bites, then dropped it into the nearest potted plant. You dug it out later, still greasy, smelling faintly of duck. Historians still argue whether his obsession with tableware reflected military discipline or chronic indigestion. You lean back now, surveying your work. Everything's in line, knives sharp but not too sharp. He once claimed overly sharp cutlery implied desperation, forks evenly spaced, spoons gleaming, even the sugar tongs passed inspection, though no one's used them in weeks. Then comes the chair rehearsal. You think you're joking? But no, this is real. Napoleon insists his dinner chair be placed precisely 1 hand width from the table. And the angle matters too, slight tilt to the left, for openness. Too far, and it's treason by posture. The chair itself is upholstered in green velvet, trimmed in brass, and probably weighs more than a cannonball. You and Etienne maneuver it into place with all the precision of a landing operation. He will inspect it later, sit briefly, shift, frown, reposition. You've seen this ritual a dozen times. Once, during a state dinner, he refused to eat because the tablecloth was too ambitious. The next day, the entire linen supply was burned. Quietly, by moonlight, that's how you learn. That's how the silver service evolves. There's also the matter of guest seating. Tonight, you've received a vague list. A general, a secretary, possibly a violinist. One diplomat, depending on the soup. Napoleon believes in spontaneous table arrangements, which means no assigned cards, but very specific expectations. You remember once placing a guest on his left instead of right. Napoleon stared silently for 5 minutes, then asked, "Is this how coups begin?" You moved the guest. Quirky tidbit. Napoleon had a personal mustard pot. Small, silver, perfectly shaped. It travelled with him, guarded like a sacred relic. Once, someone mistook it for a wax seal holder. That person was never seen again. As you prepare the condiments tray now, mustard, salt, pickled things that smell like ambition, you can't help but feel slightly proud, because when Napoleon sits at this table tomorrow, everything will look effortless, seamless, elegant. And no one will know you stayed up half the night relining spoon handles so the engraving faced east. You douse the candles, step back into the hallway where faint harp music drifts down from the drawing room. Dinner's not until tomorrow, but it already feels like a campaign, and you're winning. You've barely left the polished battlefield of the dining room when you're summoned again, to the side study this time, where the walls are lined with velvet drapes and tension, and the air smells faintly of candle smoke and ink. You already know what's waiting. A small mountain of letters stacked in imperfect towers, each one demanding the emperor's attention, or rather, yours. Because tonight, you're not a servant. You're a secretary with sore wrists, Napoleon dictates. You write. And not just 1 or 2 dainty love notes. No, this is an unbroken torrent of instructions, threats, military updates, and strangely poetic scoldings. It begins the moment he sits down at his writing desk, eyes sharp, fingers twitching. You dip the quill. He starts without warning. To the prefect of Lyon, if the roads are not cleared by Thursday, I shall consider the snowy a conspiracy. You write quickly, precisely. His speech is fast, clipped, bouncing from topic to topic, like a cannonball through dry brush. Each sentence must be clean, no crossings out. He hates corrections. He says ink should march forward, never retreat. You learned that lesson early when you once dared to blot a smudged word. He stopped mid-sentence, stared at the page, and whispered, "We do not blot in this empire." You rewrote the entire letter. Now you keep extra sheets handy. You have to, because for every dictated letter there's at least one false start. To the Admiral at Toulon, no wait, that fool can wait. To Josephine, save that for tomorrow. To the British envoy, something clever, something with sting. Right. Your ships are large, but your courage is small. No, too poetic. Delete that. Right. We await your sails, not your speeches. Yes, better. You keep up? Barely. Your fingers ache. He switches from war orders to city planning without so much as a breath. I want more trees planted near the Arc de Triomphe. Oaks, not poplars. Poplars look like surrender. You nod, trying not to misspell triomphe. Again. Sometimes he dictates for hours, with pacing, with gesturing. Once, He stood on a chair just to yell a paragraph about bridge taxes. You wrote the entire thing from below, kneeling like a scribe to a very intense statue. There are personal letters too, the ones he sends to Josephine, carefully worded to seem casual, even when he's clearly furious that she hasn't responded in 3 days. He paces while you write. Tell her the lilacs are late this year. No, say delayed. No, unfaithful. Yes, the lilacs are unfaithful. That will make her think. You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's emotional letters were sincere or strategic. Some say he was deeply romantic. Others think he was just bored and liked metaphors. You've seen enough to know it's both. You once wrote a letter that ended with the sentence, "I would conquer the moon if it meant your smile would return." He had it sealed in blue wax and told the courier to run, not ride, to deliver it. The courier returned a week later, with lilacs. Tonight, after 47 letters, he finally pauses. His hand lifts to his temple, massaging a headache no doctor dares to treat. You seize the moment and shake out your hand. Etienne enters with tea. Napoleon waves it away. "Bring ink instead," he says. "Ink refreshes the soul." So you refill the well. Again, he begins pacing, hands behind his back, muttering. "To the Minister of the Navy," you ready your pen, "tell him that ships without strategy are driftwood with flags." You nod. You admire that one. Might save it for a motto? Quirky tidbit. Napoleon once had a pen carved from an Austrian cannon handle. Said it helped him write with impact. It broke within a week. He blamed the paper. You've also seen his personal paper stash, thick, creamy vellum imported from Holland. He insists it makes his words linger longer. Meanwhile, you're left with scraps and ink-stained fingertips. He continues dictating, voice now hoarse. "To the Mayor of Bordeaux. If the citizens cannot organize a proper parade, then perhaps they should be paraded out of town." He chuckles. You don't. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of ink and metaphors, he stops. Silence. You look up. He's staring at the candle flame. "Enough for tonight," he says. "Let the letters sleep." You gently place the final sheet on the pile. Your wrist feels like it belongs to someone else. As you blow on the ink to dry it, Napoleon adds without turning around, "You write well, for a servant." You don't respond. That's the closest thing to a compliment you'll ever get. You gather the letters, stack them in order of importance, war, allies, cities, Josephine, and hand them off to the night courier. He bows, vanishes. Back in the corridor, Etienne hands you a rag and some balm. "Quill cramp again?" You nod. "You'll live?" "Probably." You're just settling into a moment of peace, wrist bandaged and eyes half-lidded, when a familiar voice bellows through the corridor. Why is the clock lying again? Ah, clock adjustment mania. You sigh, rise, and make your way, carefully, into the Emperor's private salon. It's 2:17 a.m. Not that the time matters. Time, here, is not governed by celestial mechanics. It's governed by Napoleon's mood. He stands in his dressing robe, arms folded, frowning at the gilded mantel clock like it just insulted Corsica. "This clock is 5 minutes slow. I felt it." You nod. He always feels it. "Fix it," he commands. You nod again. Of course, here's the thing. None of the palace clocks are synchronized. Not really. They all look identical. Bronze and ivory, Roman numerals, ornate mechanisms from the finest Parisian horologists, but each one is slightly, mysteriously off, because Napoleon keeps them that way. On purpose. He believes that time should never be too predictable. If everyone knows when something will happen, he once said, then the enemy does too. So every clock runs at its own peculiar rhythm. Some are fast by 3 minutes, some slow by 7. One in the sitting room ticks backward. Napoleon calls that one Russia. Your job is not to set the clocks to actual time. Your job is to set them to Napoleon time, which changes daily. Tonight he insists that the salon clock should match his pocket watch. You retrieve the timepiece, gold, elegant, engraved with a tiny bee, and check the hour. It reads 2:24, the mantel clock reads 2:17, you adjust the dial gently, careful not to overwind. You once did that and the chime struck 13. Napoleon stared at it for a long time and said, "A warning." The clock was removed. Quietly. "Good," he murmurs now, watching the hands align. He sits down and pours himself a glass of water like it's victory wine. "Time," he says, "is a servant, unless you let it become a tyrant." You're not sure if he's talking to you or the clock. He goes on. "Caesar had no clocks, he used shadows, and I am better than Caesar." You nod. He nods. Then, the kitchen clock is still lying. You freeze, because the kitchen clock is an absolute nightmare. It hangs above the hearth, constantly exposed to heat, grease, and the occasional airborne vegetable. No one can reach it without a ladder. No one wants to reach it because the ladder is always missing. And no one dares not fix it when Napoleon declares, "It's lying." So you and Etienne make your way downstairs with a chair, a broomstick, and a prayer. You poke at the hands delicately until the clock matches the emperor's preferred time. 5 minutes ahead of Paris, 3 behind Vienna, and exactly right compared to his internal sense of destiny. Back upstairs, Napoleon is dozing in his chair, a military report dangling from one hand. You slip the pocket watch back onto the side table, ensuring the chain is coiled just so. And that's when he murmurs, half asleep, "The sun should rise at 6:11 tomorrow. If it doesn't, adjust accordingly." You blink. "Adjust the sun, sire?" He opens one eye. "Exactly." You nod. "Understood." He closes his eyes again. "Good man." Historians still argue whether Napoleon actually believed in this complex dance of manipulated time, or whether it was a subtle way of keeping his staff just slightly off balance. Probably both. After all, a man who conquered half of Europe while sleeping in 4-hour shifts clearly had a unique relationship with the ticking of hours. Quirky tidbit? He once had a sundial installed indoors. No windows, no sunlight, just a sundial on the wall. When asked why, he replied, "It reminds me that light is optional." Back in the corridor, you pass the third hallway clock. You pause, it reads 2:19. You gently nudge it forward. Now it reads 2:24. Exactly as he wants. You exhale. Your job isn't to keep time, it's to keep his time. And tonight, at least, the Empire is ticking the way it should. It's well past midnight, and you've just finished syncing the last rogue clock when you hear a faint clink from the Emperor's private dressing chamber, a soft tap, then a second clink. You freeze, you know that sound. It's the sound of a snuff box being flung, and that can only mean one thing. The snuff box has displeased him again. You enter cautiously. The snuff box lies on the floor like a tiny battlefield casualty, its lid ajar, its gold filigree slightly dented, its contents, a fine brown powder Napoleon claims helps him think, scattered in a messy fan across the carpet. He's standing nearby in his embroidered robe, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if the box had personally insulted his lineage. "It sparkled," he mutters. "Pardon, sire?" "The snuff box, it sparkled." Mockingly. You nod, bending to pick it up. It is indeed a rather sparkly object, gifted by some ambassador trying to buy favour with gemstones. Gold trim, enamel inlay, a miniature scene of Napoleon himself riding into battle on the lid. It was meant to impress. It now offends. "Take it away," he says. "Replace it with the old one, the green one." Ah, yes, the green snuff box, matte finish, no decoration, the opposite of ostentatious. It was his favourite for years. He once claimed the scent of it reminded him of clarity before war. Of course, it's currently stored in the reliquary cabinet behind 3 locked drawers and a bust of Marcus Aurelius, because Napoleon had declared it too sentimental last month and exiled it. You retrieve it anyway. It's chipped. It smells faintly of clove and paper. You present it in both hands like a sacred offering. He opens it, inhales, pauses. "Better," he says. You gently brush the remnants of the other snuff box into a linen square. He watches you do it, eyes sharp. That powder was imported from Turkey, he adds. Not too dry, not too floral. They sent me jasmine once, I threw it in the Danube. He didn't, but you nod as though he did. He takes another pinch of the new snuff, sniffing deeply, then sneezes a great imperial sneeze, the kind that rattles picture frames and causes footmen to flinch 3 rooms away. You immediately offer him a handkerchief, fresh, unfolded, stitched with a discreet N in the corner. He dabs once, then frowns at the fallen powder again. This is why Europe is fragile, he mutters. We depend on dust. You don't ask what that means. Instead, you collect the broken snuff box. As you turn it over, you spot the tiniest inscription on the underside, to His Majesty from the Prussian delegation. Ah, that explains everything. Napoleon didn't dislike the box because it sparkled. He disliked it because Prussians made it sparkle. Quirky tidbit, he kept a running tally, an actual written list, of which countries sent the best snuff. Spain once ranked highest until their blend caused him to hiccup in front of a duchess. After that, Spain dropped to 5th. England naturally ranked last, permanently. Now he takes a seat. You offer him the polished green box again. He places it on the arm of his chair, gently this time, as if respecting an old friend. It's strange, he says quietly. This box has seen more victories than half my staff. You're tempted to ask whether the box attended Austerlitz. You don't. He leans back, eyes fluttering closed, fingertips still dusty. You seize the moment to slip out, the broken snuff box tucked under your arm like contraband. You'll take it to the repairs chamber, where a specialist will examine the damage and ask, "Sparkled, did it?" with a knowing sigh. Back in your quarters, you place the shattered box on the shelf beside the chipped tea saucer, the cracked boot brush, and the still faintly scorched shaving mirror, all veterans of the Emperor's moods. You call it the Museum of Minor Offences. No label needed, just knowing looks shared among staff and the quiet understanding that here in Napoleon's world, even tiny boxes can cause continental rifts. It's just before dawn and all is quiet, eerily so, which in Napoleon's palace usually means something is about to go horribly, meticulously wrong. And right on cue, a page bursts into the linen hall, whisper shouting, "He says the footsteps are too loud again." Ah, you nod grimly, silence in the hallways. To outsiders, it's just a matter of etiquette. But to those who serve him, it's a lifelong course in the acoustics of imperial paranoia. Napoleon cannot abide the sound of shoes on stone, or boots on wood, or in some particularly grumpy moods, even socks on polished parquet. He claims footsteps disrupt his thinking. "Each step is a cannonball to my brain," he once declared, as you and Etienne tiptoed past his chamber carrying an armful of folded breeches, which is how the palace developed its own strange subculture, a secret society of silent steppers. You were trained. Oh yes, there are techniques. You glide, you float, you shift your weight across the arch and ball of your foot like a cat burglar with chronic anxiety. There's a whole set of signals, gestures and eyebrow lifts for hallway crossings, pivot turns, and emergency cravat delivery without alerting the doorknob. One chambermaid, Giselle, is said to be able to walk across an entire room of dry leaves without a single rustle. Another once balanced a tray of buttered rolls while evading a escort, adding a squeaky board near the library, and received a whispered nod of approval from the Emperor himself. But today, someone has failed. You find the culprit, a young footman with heavy boots and heavier regrets. He's standing near the bust of Charlemagne, cheeks red, breath held. Etienne's already beside him, whispering the 5 rules of Napoleonic quiet. Never walk near a corner, never walk near a clock, never walk near Napoleon. Always walk near carpets. If in doubt, crawl. You sigh and begin placing felt runners down the hallway. Again, they're beige, hideous, but functional. You line them up from Napoleon's chamber to the map room, with detours to the tea alcove and the strategy nook. Yes, he has a nook for strategy. Then comes the tap test. You remove your shoes, step onto the felt, and take 1, 2, 3 silent steps. Etienne listens, tilts his head. Good, he whispers. You both nod. Of course, it's not just footsteps. It's coughs, sneezes, even throat clearings. There was that one incident, legend now, when someone cleared their throat during a council meeting. Napoleon froze mid-sentence, turned slowly and asked, "Are you swallowing disloyalty?" The room went still. The offender choked on his apology and was sent to inventory horseshoes for 2 months. To prevent such things, the staff now choose licorice root, quietens the throat, suppresses the urge to speak. The palace smells faintly of anise and fear. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon once had a pair of custom slippers made with fur-lined soles, not for warmth, but for stealth. He wore them when pacing at night, mapping imaginary battles in the dark. He called them his shoes of destiny. You once found them under a chair, slightly chewed by the dog. You never told. Now, back in the present, you're crouching to oil the hinges on the eastern service door. Again, you've already adjusted the sconces to eliminate clinking, tucked a frayed rug corner under a footstool, and reminded everyone twice that the floor, outside Napoleon's chamber, is to be walked on only with permission from gravity itself. Then comes the final test. You step into the corridor, just as the sun breaks across the floor tiles, just as Napoleon opens his door. He stands there silently, barefoot, blinking like a cat dragged into a new hour. He looks left, then right, then nothing. No comment, no scowl, success. He glides down the hall in his silk robe, not a sound underfoot. You and Etienne flatten yourselves against the wall, holding your breath. He disappears into the strategy nook without acknowledging you. That is the highest form of approval. You exhale. The day can begin until someone sneezes. 3 corridors away. A small, tragic sneeze. You wince. Napoleon's voice calls out, "Was that Austria?" You sigh. Time to start the quiet drills again. Napoleon's obsession with umbrellas might sound like a minor quirk to the untrained ear, but within these palace walls it's a full-blown saga. Imagine being the unlucky valet assigned the role of indoor umbrella handler. Your life consists of walking behind the emperor with a heavy parasol, adjusting its angle for optimal shade, even when there's not a cloud in the room. Yes, indoors. You soon learn that umbrellas are not mere rain shields, but critical components of Napoleon's indoor weather system. He demands that certain rooms have a precisely measured amount of shade throughout the day. The drawing room, partial sunlight. The council chamber, mostly shade. His private study, deep shadow, to encourage brooding. And you, poor soul, are the one tasked with making that happen. On sunny days, you're the umbrella jockey, gracefully maneuvering the parasol so that it blocks harsh rays, but lets just enough light fall on the ornate tablecloth for dramatic effect. On cloudy days, you carry a folded umbrella to symbolize preparedness. On rainy days, well, the umbrella is strictly symbolic. It never actually opens. One day, during a particularly intense rainstorm, you walked alongside him holding an umbrella indoors because he declared, "I must not be rained on, even by thought." That umbrella leaked. You were promptly reassigned to candle tending. Napoleon's umbrella collection is vast. Silk canopies embroidered with imperial bees, ebony handles carved into eagle heads, and one suspiciously heavy one rumoured to have belonged to a Venetian gondolier. He insists on inspecting each umbrella personally every morning, opening and closing them slowly, listening to the fabric rustle, judging the tension of the ribs. Quirky tidbit, he once demanded a custom umbrella with a hidden compartment to hold a small dagger, said it was for diplomatic negotiations. The dagger was lost in the Battle of Leipzig, but the umbrella lives on, somewhat more boring and daggerless. Today you're preparing the umbrella rehearsal. You practice the walk, the hold, the tilt, the elegant pivot when crossing doorways. It's like choreographing a dance where every move signals control and grace. Napoleon watches from a window, adjusting his own parasol to a perfect 37-degree angle. "Less swagger," he commands. more subtle menace. You try again. It's exhausting, yet necessary, because in Napoleon's world, umbrellas are weapons against the sun, against boredom, and sometimes against fate itself. You tuck the umbrella away and glance at the storm clouds gathering outside. The courtyard will be muddy again. The horses will be irritable. The boots will get wet. But at least inside, the umbrellas hold their ground. And you hold your breath. The grand dining hall hums with quiet tension tonight. Napoleon's voice echoes softly off the stone walls. Dinner for 6 or 40. No one quite knows which it will be until the last possible moment. You do. Because you're the one responsible for turning the kitchen and dining room into a chameleon, transforming for an intimate meal or a roaring banquet with generals, diplomats, and spies. Tonight, the guest list is fluid. It changes with every minute that ticks closer to mealtime. Invitations sent, invitations retracted, some guests arriving early, others delayed. The entire kitchen staff is on edge, ready to scale up or down the menu in a blink. You shuffle between the pantry and the dining room like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of soups, sauces, and silverware. Napoleon strolls through, inspecting. He pauses at the table and gestures. Too few plates. 5 minutes later, he reconsiders. Too many plates. You adjust accordingly. In the kitchen, Chef Renaud flares nostrils as he juggles orders for roast beef, pheasant, and vegetarian stew. The larder is a battlefield. Meats defrosted, vegetables chopped, sauces simmering. Every dish must be perfect, or else. You overhear the sous chef muttering, "I swear yesterday we cooked for 10 and served 4. Today, the opposite." Napoleon changes his mind again. The number of guests is now 42. You run to the storeroom, rummage through crates of bread and barrels of wine. You call the butler on the discreet servant line. More silverware, and tell the harpist to warm up. Yes, harpist. There's always a harpist. Because Napoleon believes music at dinner lubricates conversation and sharpens the appetite. The harpist practices in the corner, fingers flying over strings with nervous energy. He's been told to play something victorious but not boastful. That's a difficult balance. You set the chairs, rows of green velvet and polished wood. The arrangement changes with every guest count, every diplomatic nuance. Some sit closer to Napoleon, others farther. You watch the general patterns, remembering which alliances are fragile and which are simmering with resentment. There was a scandal once when a French diplomat was accidentally seated to the emperor's right instead of his left. Napoleon stared at the chair for 10 minutes, then excused himself for a private meeting with the wine steward. You moved the diplomat. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon once demanded a dinner be served entirely in silence. No music, no conversation. The guests were baffled. Napoleon claimed, "True strategy is born in quiet." The guests left early. The harpist was fired. Now, as the candles are lit and the first course is about to be served, you steady your nerves. The room looks perfect. The silverware gleams, the platters steam, the air smells of rosemary and ambition. You step back, watching Napoleon take his seat, like a man who knows he might change the entire evening with a single word. Dinner is more than a meal here. It's a campaign, a test, a theatre, and you're the unseen general behind the scenes. You've barely had a moment to catch your breath after the chaos of dinner preparations before you're reminded Napoleon's schedule isn't dictated by clocks or calendars, it's dictated by nap-time dictatorship. Napoleon naps like a man who's still fighting wars in his dreams. His naps don't follow rules, they don't obey schedules. They arrive suddenly without warning and last anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours. Sometimes he naps in his chambers, sometimes in council rooms. Once, famously, in a carriage en route to a battle. Your role? You're the keeper of naps, the quiet sentinel, the one who ensures the palace hushes at precisely the right moment. When Napoleon's eyelids begin to droop, the atmosphere shifts. The loud footmen suddenly become whisperers. The harpist puts away the strings. The cooks halt the clatter of pots and pans. Even the clocks seem to tick more softly. You gently close doors. You draw curtains. You lower the gas lamps. It's a delicate balance. Too much quiet, and he wakes. Too little, and he sleeps poorly. One time, you and Etienne measured the sound levels during his naps. Every cough, every squeak, every faint breath. You created what you called the silence map. It was mostly BL, mostly blue, with red dots where his snores occasionally startled guards. Napoleon himself called it excessive. When he naps, he insists on the nap throne, a high-backed chair draped in heavy velvet, with a footstool positioned just so. It's not quite a bed, but close enough. He sits upright, chin resting on a silk handkerchief, hands folded like a monk in contemplation. You're tasked with fluffing pillows, adjusting lighting, and, if he allows, softly playing a lullaby on the harp. But naps aren't always peaceful. Sometimes he wakes abruptly, shouting about lost battles or broken alliances. You've learned to tiptoe away before the storm hits. Quirky tidbit? There's a story of a nap so deep that the entire court waited in silence for nearly 4 hours. When Napoleon finally awoke, he declared it the best council meeting I've ever had. You suspect the harpist deserved the credit. Historians still debate whether these naps helped him recover or were a symptom of deeper exhaustion. You know only that without them, the palace would descend into chaos. Now, as you prepare the nap room for the afternoon, you smooth the velvet curtains, light a gentle lavender candle, and remind yourself to keep your footsteps as light as a whisper. Because in this palace, nap time is law, and you're its humble enforcer. The morning light spills weakly through the curtains as you approach the laundry room, a place as vital and volatile as any battlefield Napoleon ever commanded. Here lies the laundry lists of doom, the daily reckoning where missing socks and wrinkled linens can trigger tempests fiercer than any cannon fire. Napoleon's wardrobe was a vast empire unto itself, but it was the small, unassuming things, his socks, that caused the greatest unrest. Every morning exactly 12 pairs were required, not 13, not 11, 12, matched perfectly, folded crisply. One sock out of place, one stray thread, and the whole day felt unbalanced. You recall the infamous sock crisis of 1811 when a pair of black silk socks vanished days before a state visit. The staff searched high and low. Suspicions flew. An entire household was questioned. The missing socks were eventually found stuffed inside a cushion, forgotten by the laundry-maid who was subsequently reassigned. Napoleon never forgave. He wrote a letter to his valet. A man who cannot manage his socks cannot manage an army. Harsh. You carefully sort today's laundry, matching pairs, inspecting seams, and smoothing fabric with meticulous care. It's slow work, but essential. There's an art to folding socks for Napoleon. The Napoleon fold, unofficially named by the staff, involved rolling them inward, then folding in thirds, creating a neat rectangle that fit perfectly inside his shoe bags. Quirky tidbit? He once claimed that mismatched socks betrayed the spirit of discipline. You swear you heard him mutter that he might have to personally knit a new pair. Laundry day is a high-stakes operation. The staff coordinates with the kitchen for fresh water, the stable for clean horse blankets, which also count, and the upholsterers for linen curtains. Everything must be spotless, every crease must be tamed, every stitch inspected. Historians still argue whether his sock obsession was a symptom of a deeper psychological need for control or merely a superstition born of battlefield anxieties. For you, it's a daily test of patience. As you fold the last pair, you remember the words of the old laundry mistress, never underestimate the power of a clean sock. You nod solemnly. Because in this empire, even the smallest details shape the fate of nations. You're polishing a hallway mirror at 3 in the morning. You pause, cloth in hand, eyes half-lidded, wondering why mirrors always seem dirtier when the emperor is restless. Tonight's crisis, mirror complaints, a problem so absurd, yet so significant it can trigger palace-wide anxiety. Napoleon distrusts mirrors. Not openly, of course, he'd never admit that, but quietly, insistently. He claims they distort, exaggerate, mock. He calls them reflective spies. You've learned to interpret his mirror moods with uncanny accuracy. On good days, mirrors are simply polished surfaces for him to briefly admire a medal or adjust a collar. But on bad days, mirrors become traitors. They reflect a hair out of place, a wrinkle in the coat, or worse, his height. Napoleon famously insisted he was precisely 5'7" tall, and mirrors were forbidden from suggesting otherwise. You've adjusted mirrors by angles, heights, and lighting to avoid highlighting this truth. You've become an expert in optical illusions, subtly shifting mirrors downward, backward, or tilting them slightly so the emperor sees himself as he wishes to appear, taller, commanding, heroic. Today he declared the west hallway mirror too accusatory. He stood before it, squinting suspiciously. "This mirror knows something," he whispered. You nodded solemnly, as if mirrors routinely traded secrets about military defeats and misplaced gloves. Once, he claimed a dining room mirror made him look like a Viennese pastry chef. He didn't elaborate, but the mirror was promptly removed. It was quietly replaced by a flattering oval model, the friendly mirror, now beloved among staff. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon once ordered a full-length mirror lined with strategic map engravings on the frame. He claimed it allowed him to see himself in proper historical context. That mirror vanished mysteriously after reflecting too honestly during a tense moment. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's mirror phobia was rooted in vanity, insecurity, or simply boredom. You know only that mirrors are your daily challenge. Every smudge or tilt must be accounted for, every reflection delicately managed. Tonight, as you polish carefully, adjusting until the mirror gleams without judgment, you reflect briefly, no pun intended, on how your life revolves around managing reflections that lie gently to a powerful man. The emperor sleeps now, mirrors quiet, hallways hushed. But tomorrow, another reflection awaits, another quiet crisis looms. You're ready. It starts, as so many catastrophes do in this palace, with a pair of shoelaces, more specifically, shoelaces of unequal length. Napoleon sits in his dressing chair, boot half-laced, frowning at his feet like they've betrayed him in the night. You're kneeling, holding the other lace. It's a full inch shorter. You know what's coming. "These laces," he mutters, "are making a mockery of balance." You murmur an apology. He doesn't respond. He just stares at the lace ends like he's calculating artillery range. You've entered the strange, high-stakes world of shoelace politics, where symmetry isn't just aesthetic, but psychological. Napoleon insists his shoelaces match precisely. Not just in length, but in knot tension, loop height, even the angle at which the bows fall across the tongue of the boot. "They must point forward," he once said. "I will not march sideways." You remove the offending laces and begin again. Etienne appears behind you, holding the emergency lace box. He opens it like a jeweler unveiling diamonds, rows and rows of dark silk, waxed linen, tightly twisted twine, even a few made from fine horsehair, the Corsican set, rare, revered, never used. Napoleon selects a pair slowly. "These," he says, tapping the black waxed ones, "they inspire." You begin threading them through his boots with reverent precision. It's not easy. His boots are tightly stitched, the eyelet stiff, the leather stubborn. You count each cross, ensuring the tension remains identical. Too loose and he'll complain of sloppy morale. Too tight and he'll claim his blood is being redirected away from genius. There was once an aide who laced left over right instead of right over left. Napoleon noticed immediately. "You tied this like a man with regrets," he said. The aide wept. You tighten the final knot, loop left, loop right, pull, firm but gentle. The bow sits straight, symmetrical, glorious. Napoleon lifts his foot, examines it, tilts his head, then nods. "Acceptable," he says. You nearly collapse with relief, but you're not done, because now comes shoelace inspection protocol. You must repeat the same process with his spare pair, identical boots, different purpose. These will be worn during his indoor pacing hour, and the laces must be looser to allow thought to pass through the ankles. You once asked what that meant. You were told never to ask again. You lace the second pair. He tests them by walking slowly back and forth across the chamber, eyes distant, hands behind his back. With every step, the laces creak faintly. Good. These breathe. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's shoelace demands were eccentricity, military ritual, or just sheer boredom on days without battle. Some suggest he used the lacing process to meditate, to sharpen his mind before issuing orders. Others think he just liked watching people squirm over knots. Quirky tidbit: he once insisted on a lace made from braided parchment, just to see if it improved intellectual footwork. It snapped halfway through a strategy session. He declared it unreliable like the Russian winter. That parchment lace is now preserved in the palace archives, under glass, labelled Napoleon's Brief Experiment in Literary Footwear. Back in the dressing chamber, you've finished the third pair now, his diplomatic boots laced delicately with silver-threaded cord. He only wears them when entertaining heads of state or Josephine's relatives. He considers them equally dangerous. You brush the top of each boot, fold the laces neatly under the flap, and place them on the cedar rack with care. Napoleon turns to you. Shoes, like men, must be tied with purpose. You nod. Of course, purpose. He steps into the first pair. Stands, walks 3 paces. Stops. Aces. Stops. These laces, he says, make me feel inevitable. You don't know if it's a compliment, but it's the highest praise he's offered all week. It's winter again. At least it feels like winter. The hallways are colder, the marble underfoot more cruel, and the wind finds its way through gaps you swore were sealed. And in this chill, a new order emerges from Napoleon's chambers. It is too draughty. Fix the air. You're not sure what that means, but you nod anyway. Welcome to the world of room temperature tantrums, an invisible battlefield where climate becomes war, and you are the front line. Napoleon's relationship with temperature is fraught. He demands precision, but there's no thermometer. There's only feeling, his feeling, which changes hourly. Too cold? Unbearable. Am I in the Alps? Too warm? Oppressive. This is how Rome fell. Too neutral? Suspicious. What are you hiding? You adjust the fireplace. You adjust the windows. You adjust yourself, offering body heat sometimes just by standing there awkwardly holding a silver tray and hoping your breath doesn't offend the equilibrium. There are 6 fireplaces in the main wing. All must be maintained. Some burn constantly, some flicker ceremonially. One, near the green parlour, is lit only during diplomatic visits and has a dedicated draft control team. Yes, that's a thing. You're part of it now. Today's fire must be comfortably authoritarian. Not too rebellious, not too cosy. That means dry pine logs stacked in triangles, set ablaze with lavender oil for scent, and just enough crackle to suggest power. You once used cedar? Napoleon sniffed, narrowed his eyes and asked, "Is this what betrayal smells like?" It wasn't. But the logs were removed anyway. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon had his personal armchairs fitted with temperature zones. The left armrest must always be slightly warmer than the right. Why? It encourages strategic thought. You've tried it. It doesn't. There's a small, angry vent in the ceiling of the war room. It emits a noise like a wheezing goat when the wind changes. Napoleon claims it interrupts my focus. You've stuffed it with silks, rags, even 2 socks, matching, of course. Still wheezes. Then there's the window dilemma. He insists on light, but not air. Curtains must be parted, but panes must remain sealed. The glass fogs from his breath, and he wipes it dramatically with a handkerchief, declaring, "Visibility is sovereignty." You've learned to sneak behind furniture and patch drafts with waxed linen. One time you used melted beeswax from a ceremonial candle. It worked. He called the room bearable, which, from Napoleon, is the equivalent of applause. But worst of all is the evening transition. That hour when day becomes night and the room's temperature shifts by a single degree. You feel it first, a subtle shiver, a brush of chill under the collar, and before you can say extra log, Napoleon is already pacing. It's turning, he mutters. Balance is failing. You rush to the hearth, stoke, fan, whisper encouragements to the embers. Etienne brings in the emergency cloak. It's lined with fox fur and vaguely resembles a tent. Napoleon refuses it on principle but appreciates the gesture. He gestures toward the door instead. "The breeze," he says. "There's a breeze. Stop it." You run, down 3 corridors into the vestibule where a single door has been left slightly ajar. Not open, not swinging, ajar, just enough to throw off the delicate thermal alignment of the western wing. You slam it. The breeze dies, balance restored, empire intact. Back in the chamber, Napoleon sits by the fire. The flames glow confidently. He extends one booted foot toward the heat and grunts in approval. "Much better," he says. "It smells like destiny again." You don't know what that means. But you nod because in this palace, room temperature is fate, and your job is to control the air itself. No draught too small, no sigh of wind too subtle. You are not just a servant. You are the climate. Dust. Always dust, no matter how many times you clean, how many linens you shake, how many curtains you beat senseless in the courtyard. It always returns, coating every surface like a whisper of entropy. And in a palace with over 400 portraits of Napoleon, dust is public enemy number 1. Because now begins another campaign, too many paintings of himself. Napoleon walks the gallery slowly, hands behind his back, surveying his own face. He pauses at one in particular, his stern profile in full imperial regalia, and squints. "This one feel defeated." You blink. "It's from your coronation, sire?" He frowns. "Exactly." You make a note to replace it with one where he's conquering something. The truth is, these portraits have lives of their own. Some are grand, oil-painted masterpieces with golden frames the size of wagon wheels. Others are modest sketches tucked into hallways, stairwells, and, strangely, a broom closet. No one knows how it got there, but no one dares remove it. Your job today is to dust, rotate, and reposition the entire collection based on Napoleon's fluctuating moods. The victorious Napoleon collection, front and center. Pensive Napoleon, hallway of reflection. Napoleon with a dog, reserved for very specific occasions, usually after Josephine sends letters. And of course, each portrait must be cleaned with exact pressure, too firm, and the varnish blurs. Too gentle, and the dust remains. You've developed a special technique involving a goose feather wand, a breath hold, and a cloth made from worn-out cravats. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's obsession with his own image was political, personal, or just a side effect of being deeply, unapologetically Napoleon. You've seen him talk to them, brief, muttered conversations where he critiques his own eyebrows or questions the stitching of a tunic. Once, during a thunderstorm, he stood in front of a portrait of himself on horseback and whispered, "You still ride better than me." You try not to think about it. He also ranks them, silently. You know the list, even though it changes weekly. The Austerlitz portrait. Peak posture. The Egyptian study, underappreciated chin work. The snowy Alps scene. Too much wind, but otherwise excellent. The reclining portrait. Yes, that one. Unnecessary, but accurate. And let's not forget the room of rejected Napoleons, a dim, drafty space down near the wine cellars, filled with paintings that were deemed too emotional, too pink, or not flattering from the left angle. You call it the Museum of Misjudgment. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon once had a self-portrait hung directly above his bed. He stared at it each night before sleep. "He reminds me who I am," he said. That version had to be replaced after a pillow threw off its alignment by a half inch. The new one has special braces, Today's task involves swapping 6 portraits based on the seasonal confidence strategy. That means lighter backgrounds for summer, darker for winter, more hats in spring, fewer hats in July. You climb the stepladder, careful not to scratch the gilded frame. Etienne hands you a replacement. Napoleon on a balcony, cape flaring in a dramatic but meteorologically implausible wind. Is this one smiling, you ask? Only with the eyes, Etienne replies. You hang it. Perfect angle, perfect height. Napoleon enters. Pauses. Much better, he says. I look decisive again. You suppress a sigh of relief. The right portrait can mean the difference between a calm morning and a 27-minute monologue about epaulette placement. He continues down the corridor, nodding to his own face like an old friend he barely tolerates. You follow behind, cloth in hand, adjusting frames by millimeters, wiping fingerprints that probably only he could see, and mentally preparing for the next update, because tomorrow the red-trimmed uniform might feel too sentimental. And you'll be back here, dusting destiny again. You know you're in trouble when the coughing starts. Not a sickly cough, not even a dusty one. No, this is something far more dangerous, a well-timed cough in the Emperor's presence, because now you're dealing with one of the more absurdly specific landmines in palace life, coughing at the wrong time. It began last winter when a junior footman dared to clear his throat during Napoleon's evening dictation session. The Emperor paused mid-sentence, turned slowly and said, "Do you disagree with my verb choice?" The room went silent. The poor footman coughed again, more from panic than phlegm, and was immediately reassigned to the stables, specifically to the part where the horses don't live anymore. Since then, cough etiquette has become a matter of palace-wide policy. No throat clearing during dictation, no sniffling during map reading, absolutely no sneezes in the war room. There's even a sign outside the strategy alcove, contain all respiratory events outside this zone. So tonight, when someone lets out a small but tragic ahem during dinner service, you freeze. You glance down the table. 40 guests, 7 different sauces, 3 forms of roast meat, and 1 extremely irritated emperor. Napoleon narrows his eyes. Who choked on discretion? No one moves. The harpist stops mid-glissando. A wine steward quietly retracts a ladle. Someone drops a fork in fear. You already know what happens next. The lecture. He stands, slowly, dramatically, wipes his mouth with a handkerchief, points vaguely toward the ceiling. Coughing, he begins, is a form of unannounced dissent. It interrupts. It undermines. It suggests that something in the room, something perhaps in me, does not sit well with the body. You nod along like it's the Gettysburg Address. Did Caesar cough? Did Alexander sneeze before battle? He continues. For the record, probably. He sits back down. The meal resumes. Meal resumes, but now everyone's breathing through one nostril and swallowing wrong. Later, you and Etienne meet in the linen closet, where you hand him a small square of dried lemon peel and whisper, "Chew this," suppresses the urge. He chews gratefully, because here's the truth. Everyone in the palace lives in fear of accidental noises. There's a servant with a known case of intermittent hiccups. She's only allowed to work nights in the courtyard. Another young footman wore shoes that squeaked during a morning walk. The shoes were burned. He now walks barefoot and prays to Jupiter for quiet souls. There's even a secret stash of licorice root in the scullery, distributed like contraband to prevent dry throats. One cook insists on brewing a special tea of sage and silence before every breakfast shift. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon once requested that a diplomat who sniffed too much during negotiations be given a scented handkerchief to smell something better than defeat. The diplomat took offense. The handkerchief was later found stuffed into a ficus. Back in the drawing room, Napoleon is dozing post-meal, wrapped in a blanket the colour of conquest. His breathing is slow, even silent. You dare not disturb it. But then, a creak, a floorboard, a chair, no, a hiccup, a small one, barely audible. His eyes snap open. He doesn't speak. He just stares at the harpist, who looks back with the wide eyes of a condemned man. You step forward. "My apologies, sire." A bird in the rafters. Napoleon pauses, then train the bird better. You bow, deeply. Crisis averted for now, but tomorrow someone will sneeze and the cycle will begin again. You're elbow deep in fig paste at the imperial snack table, wondering when your life became a constant exercise in guessing which fruit Napoleon will trust today. Because you've entered the unpredictable arena of the imperial bedtime snacks. He doesn't call them snacks, he calls them evening sustenance for reflective minds. But they're snacks, and every night they appear on a gilded tray like clockwork, a modest arrangement of fruits, nuts, cheeses, and occasionally something pickled and unnerving. The problem is, Napoleon's mood changes faster than you can slice a pear. Last week he demanded figs. Dried but not too dried, he said. They must retain the optimism of ripeness. You nodded as if that made any sense, and scoured the kitchens for the plumpest, most emotionally balanced figs you could find. Tonight he's rejected the figs. These, he said, holding one between two fingers like it was plotting treason, taste like indecision. So now you're preparing 3 alternates: apples, crisp, never mealy; almonds, unsalted, hand-sorted; and a sliver of brie so soft it's practically an apology. The tray is arranged with military precision: fruit at 4 o'clock, cheese at 6, bread wedges diagonally sliced, forming a triangle to inspire mental sharpness. You sprinkle just a few dried cherries for colour, no more than 7. Too many is chaotic. Napoleon enters his study, robe flowing, hair doing whatever it wants. He eyes the tray. You watch his pupils. You've learned to read his appetite like weather patterns. He sniffs. Is that cinnamon? Yes, sire, just a hint on the almonds. He sits, picks up a slice of apple, chews slowly, then pauses. This is promising. You don't smile, not yet. He tries the cheese, dips a finger into the fig paste, looks thoughtful. You praise silently. Then, better than last night. Not as clingy. You don't ask what he means. You never ask. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's strange bedtime snack habits were medical, psychological, or just elaborate theatre. Some point to indigestion. Others say he used the ritual to measure how well the empire was running. If the figs are firm, so is France. You know only that you are the one who had to explain to a merchant why only the left-side pistachios in a shipment were acceptable. The others, Napoleon claimed, felt provincial. There was also the pickled pear incident of 1810. A single jar arrived from the Austrian ambassador, hand-labelled, finely wrapped. Napoleon opened it, took one sniff and shouted, "You think I'll mellow?" The jar was catapulted into a fountain. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon believed walnuts dulled strategic clarity. He banned them for a month. You caught Etienne snacking on one behind the curtain and threatened to report him to the intelligence bureau. He wept. You handed him a cashew. Now, back in the study, Napoleon leans back. The tray nearly empty, he dabs his mouth with a starched linen napkin, then reaches for one last cherry. A good tray, he says. It nourishes thought without interrupting it. You nod, high praise. He stands, paces once, then mutters, "Tomorrow, no figs?" You make a note. "Unless I change my mind." You don't write that part down, you just know. Later, in the corridor, you and Etienne collapse on a bench beside the cutlery closet. "What fruit is he on now?" he asks. "Cherry, might pivot to pear." He nods grimly. God help us if he rediscovers lychees. You both shudder. Because in this palace, even bedtime snacks are negotiations, and you're always just one overripe fig away from disaster. You'd think, after a long day of military pacing, diplomatic dining, and fig-based drama, Napoleon would settle into peaceful silence. But no, that's when the music starts. Not gentle harps in the distance, not the soft hum of a lullaby from another room. No, this is the distinct strumming of a harp being dragged through the palace. Because tonight Napoleon demands music or else. He doesn't request music, he summons it. Usually in the late hours when even the fireplaces seem too tired to flicker. You hear it then, that signature sentence uttered in a voice low and firm. Bring the harpist. Tonight, it's Jules, poor Jules, an apprentice harpist with excellent technique and absolutely no idea how to read Napoleon's mood. You escort him to the Emperor's private chamber. He's clutching the harp like it's a very large, very delicate shield. Napoleon sits in his chair, eyes closed, a single candle flickering nearby. He doesn't say a word. You nod to Jules. Jules begins. The melody is soft, cautious, like it's trying to tiptoe out of the strings. Napoleon opens one eye. Too sentimental. Jules shifts gears. Slightly faster now, a confident trill. Too optimistic. He tries again, a mournful, minor tune. The room grows colder. Napoleon sighs. Finally, a note that understands disappointment. You glance at Jules. He's sweating. You whisper encouragements. Play like you've lost an empire. He nods, terrified, and finds a melancholy rhythm that pleases. Historians rarely write about this part of Napoleon's life. But you've lived it. The late-night concerts held not for entertainment, but as strategic ambience. He believes music influences the brain's architecture. He once said, a harp in the right key can shift borders. You're not sure that's true, but you've seen him compose letters, sign treaties, even change dinner plans based on a single melody. He once cancelled a duel after hearing a particularly moving G minor progression. You later learned he didn't need to duel. The music had settled his score. Quirky tidbit, Napoleon had a travelling harp made, shorter, lighter, portable. It folded in half and fit into a leather case. He called it his emergency muse. It was carried into at least 3 campaigns, though no one ever dared play it near the artillery. Tonight, Jules hits his stride. The melody is haunting, delicate, slightly brooding, perfect. Napoleon nods along, taps a finger, then abruptly stands. Follow me. Jules freezes. Sire, with the harp. And so begins the procession. Napoleon paces the halls. Jules follows, plucking hesitant chords. You trail behind, holding a second candle and the music stand. You wind through the portrait gallery, down the hall of maps, past the room of seasonal cloaks. The melody echoes, soft and strange, like a spell cast over stone and velvet. Finally, in the war room, Napoleon stops, points to the far corner. There, Jules sets up, begins to play once more. Napoleon stares at a map of the Mediterranean. You know what he's doing. He's plotting, thinking, listening, letting the harp carve decisions into his spine. You've seen it before. He murmurs names. Genoa, Lisbon, Cairo. They all sound different tonight, he says. You nod, though you're not sure what that means. And then, as the last note fades, he turns. That will be all. Jules bows so fast he nearly drops the harp. You escort him out, give him a square of candied ginger as thanks. He looks like he's aged 10 years. Back in the hallway, Etienne waits with a knowing smirk. Did he ask for the tragic key again? Always. Poor Jules. You both glance back down the long corridor. The war room glows faintly. The Emperor is seated again, alone, planning the fate of nations scored by a harp. You're reorganizing hats. Again, not just any hats. The hat, the bicorn. That black, double-pointed marvel of myth and mischief. The one that somehow appears in every painting, every medal, every memory. Napoleon's hat isn't just a fashion choice. It's a national symbol, a directional statement, a mood. And tonight there's a problem. He can't find it. Which means you're now neck-deep in the strange, silent panic known as, "Who moved my hat?" He doesn't shout. That would be too ordinary. No, Napoleon walks into the wardrobe with the calm of a man who's about to issue a declaration of war. "The hat is gone," he says. You freeze. Etienne drops a boot. "Not gone, sire. Merely misplaced." He raises one eyebrow, the left one, which you now associate with doom. It's always stored in the same place, the hat pedestal, an isolated walnut column placed beneath a specially dimmed skylight. on a cushion of blue velvet. No other object is allowed within 5 feet of it. And now, the pedestal is empty. You begin the search, methodical, room by room. You check the campaign cloak cabinet. The glove drawer, the secret snuff drawer, still smells like betrayal. Nothing. Napoleon paces the length of the chamber, muttering, "Without the hat, I'm merely a man." You nod solemnly. He continues, "With it, I am an intention." You check the study, no hat. The music room, no hat. The kitchen, bizarrely a footman says he saw it near the preserves. You ignore that. Finally, you remember. The chair. The gold-trimmed armchair in the library where he sometimes dozes. You race there, and there it is, perched crookedly on a pile of unfolded maps, slightly dusted with ash from the fireplace. You nearly weep with relief. You retrieve it with both hands, adjust the brim, realign the inner lining, embroidered with a small B, and return it to its rightful perch. When Napoleon sees it, he stops pacing, walks up slowly, examines it like it's an old friend that wandered off for too long. He lifts it, places it on his head with ritualistic precision, tilts it forward. "Yes," he says, "that's better." You exhale. Etienne exclaims softly, "Hat status restored." Historians still argue over how many bicorners Napoleon owned. Some say 15, others claim over 100. What's known is that each one had specific uses, as the war hat, worn slightly lower for serious strategy, the diplomacy hat, brushed until it shines, the private hat, never seen in public, worn during pacing or pastry, and the mockery hat, worn at a sharp angle when he's about to say something devastating. Tonight's is the reflective hat, angled just so, brim not quite symmetrical. You once saw him tip it backward while contemplating a treaty. It made him look taller. Someone pointed that out, and that person now inventories paperclips. Quirky tidbit. Napoleon once claimed he could judge the outcome of a battle by which direction his hat faced in the mirror that morning. "Forward means victory," he said. "Left means compromise. Right means someone will be annoying." No one knows what backward means. No one dares ask. As the evening stretches on, Napoleon sits by the fire, hat still perched, head slightly bowed. He taps the brim with one finger. "This one still remembers Austerlitz," he says. You nod, not knowing if he's joking or hallucinating. And just as you're about to slip away quietly, he calls after you. "Tomorrow, rotate the hat 1 degree west." You bow. "Yes, sire." You don't know why, but you'll do it, because in this palace, hat orientation might just decide the fate of Europe. You're in the courtyard before dawn, bundled in 3 layers of wool and regret, staring at a wooden cart packed with sawdust, linen, and glistening blocks of solid ice, which can only mean one thing: ice delivery meltdowns. Napoleon, like many men of ambition, had a complicated relationship with temperature. But unlike his temperamental drafts and symbolic fireplaces, his obsession with ice was a matter of logistics and honor. Ice was stored deep in the palace's subterranean glacière, a vaulted stone chamber lined with straw and prayer. Acquiring it involved bribed alpine merchants, discreet winter expeditions, and a network of couriers who traveled with more urgency than battlefield messengers. Why? Because Napoleon demanded cold water, chilled wines, and most absurdly, iced fruit on occasion. He claimed it refreshed the mind and once declared, "A warm grape is a defeated grape." You're the unlucky soul who now oversees this morning's delivery. The blocks harvested from the Mont Blanc region have travelled by cart overnight, covered in straw, wrapped in wool, and watched like treasure. A quarter of the shipment has already melted. Etienne sighs as he lifts another damp linen sheet. "We've lost Prussia," he mutters. You carry the remaining blocks down into the storage chamber, where the temperature remains just above mutiny. The ice must be stacked carefully. No direct contact, airflow allowed, straw between layers. You document everything. Napoleon expects a daily ice log, not for inventory, for reliability. Once a single missing block triggered a 4-hour investigation. It was found wedged behind a bag of potatoes, half melted and ashamed. Later that day, Napoleon accused his lemonade of being philosophically tepid. Now, with the ice squared away, you rush to prepare the chilled basin in his dressing chamber. It's a silver bowl filled with mountain cold water used for his morning face rinse. He claims it tightens the skin and clears political fog. He dips his hands in, lifts a handful of water, and flinches. Too cold, you nod, as requested. He stares at you, then slowly nods back. Very well, that's a victory. But your day isn't over, because next is the wine rotation. Certain bottles must be chilled to exact degrees, not for taste, but to match historic conditions. If he's drinking a vintage from 1798, it must be served at campaign temperature, meaning cooled to whatever the Alps felt like that year. You once presented a Bordeaux that was 5 degrees off. He sniffed, sipped, and said, "This tastes like unmotivated infantry." The bottle was smashed, gently, but with ceremony. Quirky tidbit? Napoleon tried inventing his own refrigeration system once. It involved a series of copper tubes, melted beeswax, and the draft from a horse's nostrils. It did not work. He called it too modern. Now in the kitchen, the cook calls for the ice for dessert. A small bowl of cherries must be served over crushed ice. But the ice is late. Etienne sprints down to the cellar. You grind the last of yesterday's stock with a hammer and a towel. The crunch echoes through the marble halls. You arrange the cherries with gloved hands, sprinkle the ice like sugar, and carry the dish into the salon with reverence. Napoleon inspects it, takes one cherry, chews, takes one, then looks up. This feels like clarity. You resist the urge to faint. Back in the kitchen, the ice hammer falls silent. Etienne hands you a cup of lukewarm water. "You know," he says, "I dreamt last night I was a glacier." You nod. Were you melting? He stares into the middle distance. Constantly. Because in this palace, ice is not a luxury. It's a measurement of discipline, an emblem of control. And if it melts too quickly, well, so might France. You're halfway through polishing the brass keyholes of every door in the western wing, a task so tedious that time itself seems to hesitate when the bell rings. Not the dining bell, not the strategy bell, the bath bell. You brace yourself, because nothing in the empire is as simultaneously mundane and terrifying as Napoleon's bath rituals. The man bathes like he's negotiating peace with water. It's never just a soak. It's a carefully measured, sometimes musical, frequently interrupted, always opinionated ceremony. You hurry to the imperial bathing chamber, marble everywhere, columns that serve no purpose but intimidation. A tub large enough to fit a medium-sized cannon, and once nearly did, after a logistical error. Etienne is already there, pouring boiling water into the copper basin. You bring the cold. You always bring the cold. The temperature must reach exactly 36 degrees Celsius, as warm as memory, Napoleon once described it, though how he calculated that remains unknown. He enters in silence, robe trailing, expression unreadable. You bow, as does Etienne. The only other time the two of you bow in unison is when handling meringue. Napoleon disrobes and steps into the tub with the gravity of a bishop entering confession. He settles slowly, eyes closing, sighing not from comfort, but strategy. You wait. "I will not speak for the next 10 minutes, he declares. You time it. Exactly 7 minutes in, he speaks. The bath is not symmetrical. You look at the tub. It's an oval. "No matter, I will bathe diagonally." He repositions himself like a man realigning Europe. The soap is brought forward, handmade, rose-scented, embedded with crushed almonds. It was once a diplomatic gift from the Duchess of Parma. Napoleon renamed it Conquest No. 3. He uses exactly 6 swipes, 3 per arm, 1 for the chest, 1 for memory, 1 for destiny. You don't ask questions anymore. There was a week last year when he bathed with bay leaves floating on the surface. It encourages fortitude, he said. He smelled like stew for days. Quirky tidbit? He once tried bathing with wine, not watered down, pure wine. It took 4 barrels. He claimed it brought visions. It mostly brought ants. The experiment was quietly discontinued. Historians still debate whether Napoleon bathed for health, vanity, or simply as an excuse to escape paperwork. He claimed it cleared the fog from my spine. Others suspect he just liked having an entire chamber warmed and scented to his liking. Today there's a problem, a missing towel, not any towel, the green one. He refuses the blue. Too diplomatic, the white, too Austrian. The embroidered one with his initials feels self-indulgent. You sprint 3 rooms over, tear open the linen cupboard, and unearth the green towel from behind a stack of monogrammed napkins. You return just as he stands, water cascading down like a metaphor. He accepts the towel with the solemnity of an armistice. "Thank you," he says. "I can now exit this bath with dignity." You and Etienne step aside as he passes. The air smells of almonds, power, and mild disapproval. Back in the chamber, you drain the tub, dry the walls, fold the green towel with reverence. You leave a small note in the towel closet. Restock green towels. Prepare for next vision. Because in this palace, baths are not about cleanliness. They're about control. And every drop matters. It's the middle of the night, and the palace is quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears invent sounds. A creak here, a whisper of wind, a drip that may or may not be real. And then you hear it, the shuffle, the subtle, unmistakable sound of Napoleon wandering the halls in slippers, which means only one thing, the night patrol. He does this occasionally, no warning, no schedule, just appears, robe cinched tightly, hair flattened on one side, eyes full of mystery and menace. Tonight you find him inspecting the hallway sconces. "Too dim," he says. "Ambition requires brighter shadows." You nod, as usual. The deeper meaning is not yours to question. He continues, slowly pacing, sometimes humming, sometimes muttering to himself. Once, you caught him whispering to a curtain, "Don't look at me that way." Your job is to trail him invisibly, close enough to assist, far enough not to disturb the metaphysics of midnight genius. You hold a candle, a silent notepad, a spare quill. Also 3 kinds of snacks in case he suddenly decides he's hungry for dried apricots, which happens roughly once a month, always at 2:37 a.m. Tonight he turns into the gallery of battle miniatures. "Who moved Waterloo closer to Moscow?" he growls. You blink. The models have not moved. Still, you shift them just a few inches. He watches, nods. History must respect geography. He moves on. The library is next. He opens a book, any book, scans a few lines, then closes it with great ceremony. He whispers, "Useless, even if it was a cookbook." Once he read half a paragraph about Venetian sewage systems and spent the next hour redrawing the layout of the palace privies. Quirky tidbit? He once demanded a shelf of books be organized not by author, not by subject, but by how strongly they believe in me. Etienne had to guess. He arranged them from sycophantic biographies to hesitant encyclopedias. Napoleon was pleased. Historians still argue whether these night patrols were exercises in security, insomnia, or theatrical solitude. But you've seen them for what they are, his personal chess match with silence. He stops in the tapestry hall, stares at a massive scene from his Italian campaign. You wait, silent. He points. "That man there, too much red. Have it muted." You write, "Desaturate red" in tapestry. How you will accomplish that is tomorrow's problem. He keeps walking. You follow, past the cabinet of coins, past the hall of commemorative chairs. Yes, that's a thing. He pauses at a door and opens it just a crack. The observatory. Moonlight spills in. He steps inside. You hesitate, then follow. The room is cold, high windows, a tilted telescope unused for weeks. Napoleon gazes upward, as if expecting Jupiter to salute. "Do you ever wonder," he says slowly, How I'd look from space? You consider your words? Triumphant, sire. He smiles, just barely. He sits in the observatory chair, the same one where he once ate an entire lemon tart while watching clouds. You remember, it was Bastille Day. Now he's still. The candle flickers, he seems smaller, just for a moment. Then he stands. It's enough. History sleeps. And with that, he walks out. Not back to his chamber, not to the bath, just onward. You extinguish the candle, fold your notes, take one last glance at the sky. The palace settles. The world, somehow, feels slightly more in order, because in this strange, gilded life, where nothing is too small to command attention, a shoelace, a harpcord, a cherry at the wrong angle, Napoleon still rules not just a country, but the silence between thoughts. And you? You follow, always. And now the palace sleeps. The torches gutter low in their sconces, painting flickering shadows across marble and velvet. The corridors, once alive with the rustle of cloaks and the clatter of boots, are still now, hushed, paused, as if holding their breath until morning. The fireplaces have softened to embers, the trays have been cleared. The portraits, all those vigilant Napoleons, seem to have closed their eyes just a little. Even the green towel lies folded and quiet. In the grand chamber, the emperor himself rests. For once, not calculating, not correcting, not composing, just resting. The kind of rest that slips in slowly like a tide, gentle but certain. You ease out of the room, your steps are soundless, the air smells faintly of rose soap and parchment. Behind you, the candle's final curl of smoke disappears into the dark. And as you walk the length of the silent gallery one last time, you pass the harp, the hat, the still bowl of untouched figs. Each thing in its place, each thing quietly absurd and yet deeply important, because in this palace nothing is ordinary, and somehow that makes everything feel safe. So now, wherever you are, whoever you are, breathe a little slower. Let the images fade. Let the strange softness of midnight bureaucracy wrap around you like a robe from the linen closet of history. You're not needed for anything now. There are no fig emergencies, no shoelace catastrophes. Just sleep. The empire will wait.